All right, I think we should be live. Welcome everybody that is tuning in on the recording and the folks in the session today. Excited. This is I think, first or second iteration of community member-led workshop that we're going to be kicking off and testing here in GTM United. Really stoked to have our good friend Keith Dahl with us today. We're going to be workshopping how to master self and situational awareness with DISC. So we're going to be talking a lot about owning your style, how it's perceived by others, identifying style in others when you're having conversations, and being able to recognize and adapt and effectively speaking to a person or specific situation, especially when you're thinking about being in a selling environment or as a sales leader working with your team. Keith just kicked off a session yesterday with the B2B SaaS work. It sounds like it's a really well-received group, really well-received session. So super stoked to have you here, Keith. Keith is the founder and CEO of BeKinetic. I won't take up too much of the mic space, Keith, but I'm super stoked to get involved in this. I have been tangentially tied to DISC for quite some time, but I've never had sort of a dedicated sit-down session to learn the more intimate details of how to apply it in everyday life, especially in selling environments. So thanks for being here, and thanks for being part of the community, and thanks for sharing your knowledge with everybody.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I will find a way for the both of you to put in a little, hey, here's DISC for deal when you're moving. I'll find a little reference at some point for sure.
I love it.
So I am stoked that yesterday was a master class for more than 50 people. I'm going to say, let's make this a master chat for the half dozen of us have had here. And that means it's the best way for us to get value out of this is to dig deep in situations, massive audience participation. I use this and have used it every single day, personally and professionally, for more than 12 years, because I recognize prior to that, like, holy crap, I was single-handedly messing up communication and relationships and had no idea. So this is kind of that eye-opener that I've had, and then something I've been using intentionally therefore, and clients and others who have benefited in many different ways. Never want to make assumptions. Worst thing you can do, particularly when you're going live. So just a simple why for yes or no for no, and for no. Are you familiar with DISC? Just to give me a level playing field. Are we dealing with some rookies, or are we dealing with people that already have a working knowledge looking to take it up? Okay. So I have a plan for both. All right. So for the two that, for the most, never used it before, know the acronym. Okay, very good. So I'm going to be able to take this at a little bit of beginner's level, just to make certain that we all have a working knowledge and glossary of what we're talking about. And then I'm going to be able to help apply it to various situations. In order for you to learn, and I know this isn't always easy, sometimes it's shy, I'm a stranger, I don't bite, but I would like for you to ask questions. Keep it short, keep it simple, essence of time, either in the chat or let's come off mute. Let's talk about something that you just ran into. Hey, can I debrief a call real quick from last week? See if there could have been a better way. Or I have something coming up tomorrow. I want to nail this. And there's going to be those opportunities. If you volunteer, you learn more, and so do the rest of the people around you. Right. And that's why I like about this community. If Grace asks a question and she's being a little vulnerable, Grace learns, and all the rest of you are like, yeah, glad she asked that question, so I didn't have to. Right. And I understand this element's happening inside your brains. We don't know each other, so let's kind of lean into it. Fair? This for yes, that for no. Awesome. So to frame our minds, because I don't know about your experiences, pausing whatever you're doing that's important, and then really focusing and being fully present on a session like this, particularly virtual, can be tough. So let's frame our minds to open it up to what we're about to say, and you'll see some very simple parallels to something you do every single day that will make it easier for you to start to adopt what we're going to cover today. So imagine for a moment, hypothetical, immediately following this session, you have to go stand outside for 1 hour. You want to make sure that you're dressed appropriately. In the chat, what are you going to check? Immediately thereafter, 1 hour from now, you have to stand outside for an hour. You want to make sure you're dressed appropriately. What are you quickly going to check? The weather forecast. Thank you, Jessica. Now, when you look at the weather forecast, are they always 100% correct? No. Are they usually close enough that if you had to make an educated guess about the unknown awaiting you, you might be able to become at least mostly prepared? Can we get an agreement? And when you're looking at the weather report, you're only looking for four things. Is it hot? Is it cold? Is it wet? Or it's dry? Any other things that you might get, the added little details. Do I bring a jacket just in cases, or maybe an umbrella? Do I change my shoe? Those little things you don't know, but you're going to be looking for. But there's only four things you're looking for to make sure you're unprepared for this unknown 60-minute appointment. In that case, outside. So let's frame our minds for the 60-minute appointment that you're unprepared for with other individuals who are important to your team or your pipeline. And let's just put the lens of the disc and understand what four things you might need to look for. All right. So Ryan, how do I share this? How do I advance the next one? We got it all set up, but how do I advance the next slide?
You should be able to just hit arrow. Is that working?
Hang on a second. It's not giving me the controls now. All right.
Oh, there we go.
Go. So if I take it out of, just quickly, again, this could be the user here. If I take it out of this current mode where I can see all the smiling faces, I can switch it, but I can't switch it internally here. So if there's some directions for me moving forward, that would be great. But we're going to camp out on the next slide after this one here for a while. Okay. So one of the things I want you to start recognizing, I'm a big fan of cheat sheets. How do you have these quick references for when I need them, whether it's a cut and paste in a template, whatever those are. And I think about DISC in a lot of those areas. So very quickly, this is for your own benefit, write down on a piece of paper or type it up, who's the person that you interact with personally or professionally the most often that tends to talk about results, getting things done now. Write his or her name down, personally or professionally. And it can be you, by the way. And then so forth and so on for the next ones on there. Who's the person that's usually full of energy, very talkative, that usually is the fun factor in a conversation? Write their name down. Brian, yes, you're quite right. And then the stability. And here's a little hint. The person who says, this is the way I've always done it, or this is the way we've always done it, is a dead ringer for an S every single time. We'll get to that here in a minute. And then for the final one, who's the one who's always talking about process, analytics, data, those kind of case studies? Those right there will represent four people that while you're beginning this journey, you can say, oh, they're like a Scott. Scott has these attributes. This person's like a Ryan. They have these attributes. You will start to get someone that you know well and hopefully can communicate well with, that you can say, they're a little bit like X. How do I naturally, and now we're going to do it intentionally because we're going to learn the science and psychology, how do I tweak and adjust to become, just like with the weather forecast, best prepared for this next conversation? Because I'd like to think that it's going to be important for your pipeline or for your team or company. Okay. So some of you are going to be familiar with the acronym. Let's go ahead and dig down deep. D stands for dominant, your stereotypical type A personality. I put onto the prior slide, they tend to be results focused. Now, all of the attributes that are up there for D, whether you're a seller, you're a leader, or whatever your role might be, I think we can all agree those are great characteristics to have. But as I have found firsthand and secondhand, there are quite a few upsides and potential downsides to each and every one of them. So you'll see me post a lot, and in this mention self-awareness. Which one of these are mine? And am I saying and doing the things the way I could so I'm not walking around with the broccoli stuck in my teeth and upsetting people in the process? Or if I'm dealing and interacting with someone, are they wired similarly or opposing? What can I be listening for and looking for in their conversation, in their writing, and how they say them? These nuances are bouncing all around you. I'm hoping that after today's session, you won't be able to unhear this, and you're going to start to recognize little things that were all around you before that you haven't been using in your outbound. So the D style, if pushed, if stressed, and I've got a slide on that here a little bit later because all of you are looking for them to change and all of you can be stressful. when you're selling, we want to make certain that we are not inadvertently creating an awkward situation. The I is that influencer. They are the energetic, talkative, again, talking about fun. They're people, and necessarily people pleasers. They're people. They get energy out of sessions like this. They miss the collaboration sometimes in the office. Right. This is the energy. They're the drive behind a lot of times marketing and culture and a lot of those good things. The S, the steady relator. I'm going to spend just a moment longer on here because this is an important thing to listen to. When you start to identify the characteristics of S's and you start to recognize how to communicate with them effectively, your sales will make a huge difference and your sales cycle will tend to shorten. The conversion will tend to happen more frequently. And here's why. The S's will almost always be one of the biggest champions or one of the biggest adversaries to your sale because they like the things that are consistent. Here's what we know. I want to make sure I'm looking out for the best interests of my team, my clients, my customers, as the case might be. And the idea of change can be a little unsettling for them because when you think about an organization and as you start to analyze, who are the people that are usually in charge of implementing and maintaining onboarding and programs and ramping ups? They usually end up being the S's. So if you are that features and benefits, gun blazing type of salesperson, please by all things, always stop. But if you're that person talking about change, it's gonna be great, it's gonna be wonderful, they're automatically on their heels and they're gonna whisper to whomever internally, remember the last time we got this great idea about changing something or go to market and what happened? Right now, so obviously understanding these dynamics, you're going to have champions and advocates inside your sales process that are S's. You'll have to learn how to protect them so they don't try to sell and close the deal on your behalf. Seasoned pros, we know that doesn't work. But at the same time, we got to make sure we understand how to work and navigate with these different styles. Okay. The S, because Memorial Day weekend is coming up, little sidebar of how to picture the S. Anybody else besides me have that relative when a holiday comes? They're like, I'll host it, right? And we were all raised right, I hope. What do we ask? When they volunteer to do all the things and host it, what do we ask them? What can I bring? How can I help? What time should I be there? And the answer is what? Almost every single time. Come on, audience participation. No, just yourselves. I got this. So anyone who's married with, knows, or closely with somebody like this, day before, what are they doing? I got all these people coming over, the food, right? They bring on too much. So the S's can be too willing to take on too much. If you are an S, evaluate how many times you say yes versus how many times you say no, because you might be doing this unintentionally. But your prospects might be trying to do too much on your behalf. Or if you just come in steamroller style, all fun and excitement and not recognizing what might be going through their head, now all of a sudden change is scary and you're someone to protect against gatekeepers. Most gatekeepers I know have a lot of S in them. Embrace it. And then the C style, the conscientious, compliant, I like to call them the critical thinkers. They will not and cannot make decisions without having some kind of data or case study, something to prove it. They have to have a precedent. And if it's your precedent, they're going to nitpick the heck out of it to make sure it's up to their standards. The thing to think about when you have a C style involved in your process, and anyone selling to CFOs, COOs, CIOs, probably a good chance there's quite a bit of it here. They are also going to be risk adverse. And so you have to be able to have the data, the science, the whatever to help them understand why what you're saying and what you're presenting to be able to help them see and understand how it's going to work. That's how their brain thinks. I don't care how your brain thinks. This is how theirs thinks. So if you're the I, this is great. I would love to get 15 minutes for a demo. I'll even send you a box of cookies and blah, blah, blah. That C styles me like, hey, look, sounds fun. Sounds like if you had too much coffee, there's no framework, no whatever, delete. It's going to happen every single time, right? And so recognizing these things are happening, how do I lean into them, right? So to help put things together, and then I want to be able to get a lot of questions, a lot of specifics from each and every one of you. I want to give you a quick little image of how this works in something we can all relate to.
Keith, would you mind if I interject the question?
Oh, please do.
So, how much of this, and I might be jumping the gun, so just tell me to hold my horses if so. How much of like understanding DISC and implementing it, in your opinion, is about like mirroring versus just understanding and sort of like accommodating the way that these folks' brains might work?
Great question.
Yeah.
I say it's both. And you put mirroring and then understanding, I would flip them. It's understanding what might be important or what might be most comfortable for them, situational awareness, and then me thinking, okay, how might need to make a couple of preparations, forecast, how might I need a couple of preparations so I know how to mirror them and to what extent. I've had people who have tried and they've overcompensated, and then they get the kind of little side eye, like, what's going on? So I think it's understanding these different styles tend to be wired differently to be able to understand pros and cons of, and then how do I make some tweaks or adjustments so that way I can mirror and match them a little more comfortably. Okay. Connor, you have a question?
I'll ask Connor's question on his behalf if he's not going to be. The short answer is he wants to know how he can identify. He's wrangling toddlers. How he can identify which he is, and sort of like if he's towing the line for multiple, how can he figure that out?
Perfect. So this is not by any means a pitch, but since the question was asked, the best thing that you can do in your professional is pay for a good DISC assessment. My experience over a decade plus doing this, if you get a free one, it's better than nothing, but it's not going to be everything that you're looking for. So chat with me. I'll make sure you get whatever it is that you need. But understanding self-awareness, understanding your style, and you'll understand more about this when I help unveil mine a little bit later with your help. Understanding your style, and then it helps you. In the next slide, I'll dig into it a little bit further as far as how to identify that of others. And then being able to pause so you can respond or hopefully prep, and you'll start to get a little bit better with the wrangling the toddlers. But to that point, Connor, that first exercise, who speaks about results, fun, steadiness, stability rather, and data, taking a quick glance at what are the things that seem to resonate, which one of those sets of characteristics remind me or most closely remind me of those people you're wrangling. Some cases you might be doing more work than you need to because you're inadvertently doing it the wrong way. And anyone who has kids, what works with some kids and what works with others, right? And you adapt. This is the science and psychology behind why that works, so you can do it intentionally. Great question. Any others? Clarification. This is all about you. This is real time. I don't need to hear myself talk. I want to hear myself answer questions that help you. Okay. Yes, everybody has a bit of each. I have done over 20,000 assessments or so over the last decade. I've only had 2 where they were 100% in the category. Both of them were Ds. Both of them were retired executives that are sitting on multiple boards, right? That's a completely different dynamic than you or any of us are going to ever face. So yeah, we have that mix, and it's being able to understand, here's my superpowers. How do I use them appropriately? Again, simple reference to the weather forecast. And I'll dig deep into a very specific situation where I had a prospecting opportunity. I'm like, all right, well, let's see where this goes. Turn into oh no, this could be a massive first impression. I need to rally all my skills. And I'll break down that session. It's something you all can do in less than 5 minutes preparing for big calls or small calls. And that's where I want to get us to here in just a moment. All right.
Question, since you've been doing this for a while, Keith,
yes.
Is this one of those things where you've seen people change which one tends to be their primary one throughout their life?
Their primary doesn't typically change throughout their life. Now, within the DISC world, regardless of how people touch it, there's all kinds of different thoughts and theories. because this is based on behavioral and cognitive psychology over the last nearly 100 years,
Yeah.
they tend to recognize that in the end of those formative years when we're growing up, 6, 7 years old, that's usually when whatever disc quadrant you're in, when you get your primary, you've probably been bouncing around that quadrant for your entire career. And until something changes, big altering change, personally or professionally, you're usually in it, but you can navigate around depending upon the role. The secondary or even sometimes tertiary for people can change. I'm now going into more of a selling role, or now I'm going into more of a leadership role, more of a customer success role. Your need might adapt for the secondary, but your quadrant for your primary typically stays the same. Where I have seen exceptions outside of the life altering, experiences have been those that have maybe been on the cusp. They were on the cusp. They're almost 50-50 CNS, and then they get promoted. Then they become a little bit more then the 50-50 splits, flips, if you will. I've seen those. I don't usually see big drastic changes. So have you experienced anything yourself over the time?
Personally, I try to cultivate a very close sense of self-awareness, and I think that the ability to step back and observe oneself gives one the opportunity to make decisions a little bit differently and potentially move from one category to another. I'm not suggesting that someone might change as they mature or as they age, but rather that as one becomes more self-aware of which one of these they might more primarily fit into, they might go out of their way to cultivate skills that would push them into a slightly different category.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So before I had mentioned about assessments, and in other sessions, people ask, should I, can't, how, why would I? When you do a good assessment, it's going to give you the results a natural style. This is like an MRI, like it or not. This is where you are based upon your data, because you're the one that answered the forced response questions. Then there's an adaptive. And the adaptive can be looked at two different ways. It could be, in order for me to be successful or more successful in my role, here's some things I might need to tweak or adjust in my style, or learn how to tweak and adjust in my style so I can do a better job of, adjusting and adapting in some of these conversations, the mirroring and matching that Ryan asked about earlier. What happens, however, some cases is people go, oh, and it becomes almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. I've had people like, oh, I need to be more extroverted. I'm like, no, the world cannot handle more of an extroverted, right? So sometimes, and that's why I think getting a good assessment that really helps you figure out what it is I'm looking at, and then tapping into free or otherwise resources like me that can help you fine tune and direct with some of it. So since the questions are popping up and we have it on the screen, typically I'll wait to ask this question until near the end, see how good of a job I did, as well as to see how much everyone was paying attention and absorbing the info. But I think based on that last question, I'm going to ask it now. All the characteristics of DISC are on the screen in front of you. And admittedly, just in the few minutes we've been together, you have seen me intentionally exhibit all 4 of them. In the chat, if you had to put me in just one of those quadrants as my primary, which one would it be? Of that D, I, S, and C characteristics there, I have intentionally delivered to you in all 4 styles in our 24 minutes together. Okay. I do like the audience participation. However, not everyone has responded, and so far no one has responded correctly. There you go. Process of elimination. So,
oh, come on, Ant.
I'm going to ask the group. So, and here, this is what.
Guess you'll never know. It was D in the beginning, but I just.
Fair.
No.
Fair.
Okay. So here's the interesting thing I have to the question. None of you picked D and none of you picked I. Why?
I mean, I'll chime in. Because, I mean, I think the cadence at which you speak and present, like, you give off a calming vibe. You are steady, consistent. So, like, that's where I went there. The D and the I for me probably plays into that because like you're not being overly assertive. I didn't feel like any sort of like push from the communication. Also, you weren't sort of like over the top. When I think of I think more of like super extroverted. So that's why I chose S.
Okay. Okay. Very good. So secondary question for each of you. I know you haven't been assessed, or if you have, it's been ages and you probably haven't tapped into your look. Looking at what's on the screen now, if you had to guess what quadrant is your primary, put that in the chat right now. So if you had to guess, take your time, because and we can make sure we'll find a way to, anybody who wants to get assessed, we'll find a way to make it work so we don't break your budget and I don't have to eat it all myself. So we'll figure that out. We'll do a little go-to-market United event or a rate as well. Okay. So what's interesting is I went to each and every person's LinkedIn. Chris saw me there this morning, and I was doing a little bit of sleuthing. Now, the session I did yesterday was with Humantic AI. This is not a commercial for, but they are a fantastic to give you quick insights on. So it's an opportunity for me to go to complete strangers. I click a button, and based upon what's on your profile, it gives me a general idea of what their disc style likely is, as well as some insights as do's and don'ts on talking to them. So at least at this point, I had a possible, thinking back to the forecast, a possible understanding of what the mix was in the room. So I came to present my style based upon what information was available. Because if I came in on my true style, which is an off the charts D with enough C to understand and love process, I'm not a process builder, but I will take your process up 3 levels. I am results focused and process oriented. And I share this openly here now because of some of the combos that we're coming across. Part of the challenge that I faced was because I didn't understand that I was wired to be the DC, and I was going through my professional career inadvertently causing the problems. And you think about the people that I respected and the people that I looked at as far as influences. You know, I had the leaders that gave that tough love. It's like, well, it hurts when I do that. Well, don't do that. You know, it's I gave it my best, and they're like, well, suck it up, buttercup, try it again. Right. So I grew up with that between, competitive sports, military, like I grew up in that mindset. So that DC was honed early on through my entire career. And so then I get into the professional world and I see others doing it and being successful. So I mirrored their behavior. Single-handedly killed deals, made people leave. Probably one reason why I got fired. The only time I've ever gotten fired was probably because of. And so when I had these things, hey, Jessica, I don't know if I should be proud or insulted with that one, but I recognize.
I met Ryan.
Oh, okay, gotcha. I was like, she could see him. I'm like, wow, how? Thank you for the rescue. But those are the things where I stopped and I realized, personal and professionally, I wasn't doing bad, but I had the blinders on. I'm expecting excellence from other people, and I'm not bringing excellence myself. And it was that part that made me say, oh, you know what? Everybody needs this freaking disc thing. And so every company we work with, hey, we've got a dynamic not happening. Let's see what we're working with. Hey, hiring isn't going right. Well, let's see the mix that you have of people. Maybe you're hiring all of one style because they're the same style as you and you got a whole bunch of unproductive friends. Like, I don't know what's happening in your organization, but I do recognize that there are nuances involved with all of this that you should be considering. Sometimes it's 10%, sometimes it's 90%, and you would have gone a completely different path without it. Okay. Going to the next, we'll talk about stress. I give a little teaser to this beforehand. Not everybody likes stress. Not everybody deals with it correctly or the same. So this is something that I've used for leadership. Actually, this slide I used the day after the state of Maryland closed COVID. I had 40 different executives on the board on online panicking, and it was talking about stress. How are you dealing with change? Who you're delegating to based upon their strengths, etc. For today's session, though, think about you inadvertently being the kind of salesperson that you're like, when you see the post about them on LinkedIn, but you're doing the same thing, this is your opportunity of, if you are starting to have an interaction with a D or an I or an S or C, and you're starting to learn these things and hear them and see them, and they're acting like they see on the screen right now, they're stressed about some kind of change. You want them to change the company or the product that they're using for something. It's change. It can be stressful. Recognize that. And this is how they respond to stress. So if I'm on a conversation with Jessica, I've acknowledged that she is this particular style, and I'm seeing a whole lot of what's happening on the screen right now in my conversation. One of two things are happening. Somebody set her off before our call, or I'm setting her off in our call. I want to make certain that I prepare so I don't trigger something, but I also want to make certain that if I'm seeing, hey, Jessica, can we talk a little bit here for a second? I'm getting a sense of, and the words that come out of your mouth should be some of the triggers that are on the screen right now. Is there something I can do to help? Was it something I said? Now they will level down. They recognize you're trying to relate. So I'm throwing this up here again, particularly with the S's. You're trying to sell somebody something. It's either the first time that they've ever done your product or service, all kinds of stress about the change, or they have to replace something they already have. With the S's and sometimes the C's, they would rather have something that they're familiar with that's flawed than have to go and subject themselves to that whole, here we go again, whether it was 3 months ago or 10 years ago. The S's and C's will tend to hold on to that baggage because it was so unpleasant before. Okay. Questions on stress or change. I wasn't planning on spending a bunch of time here, but that perspective and how it relates to, I think, will be applicable for several of you. Anything from the crowd? Going once, twice? Okay. So now I'm going to make an assumption, which I don't usually like to do, but that each of you would like to see perhaps, all right, we have a general understanding. Now, how do we use it to prepare for a sales call coming up? Are we to that point where I could dedicate like 4.5 minutes to walk through a real scenario that is in my pipeline right now? And it just popped in, so it was good. Awesome. Thanks, Brian. So had somebody reach out to me via LinkedIn. Hey, based upon some of the posts you're coming across, I think there could be an opportunity to have you help me or help my team. I get those a lot. Some of you might get them as well. My thing was, okay, if this is going to happen, I'm going to have to punch way above his pay grade to be able to make this thing happen. Suggest, but I was appreciative. 15 minutes, see whether or not, find out what's going on and see if it even makes sense to pull in anybody on your leadership team. He agreed. 10 minutes in, we hit upon a major pain point. Come to find out, it was the senior VP of HR that was actually working on an initiative that could address that pain point. So my ask was, would it make sense for you and I to invite her to come into a conversation and start at your own pace, next steps, right? All of us would agree that is a nice, natural next step. I send across the calendar invite to both of them with a rough agenda, how a meeting like this could and should go, just to get everyone prepped. Within an hour, after I returned back to my email, I saw that there was not one, not two, but 7 total people accepted on the meeting request. Ryan's got that. I'm like, this is either going to be a really good thing or a really bad thing. It was up to me, think the weather forecast, to determine, is this a good thing or a bad thing? So I looked at it and I saw the CEO and her assistant. I saw the CFO and their assistant. So the 2 assistants were there just kind of taking notes and mindful, I'm thinking. I also saw the VP of marketing. So I'm thinking, all right, I have 4 complete strangers that are going to pop up onto my screen here tomorrow, and they're going to look very much like the graphic here, where in their disk windows. I don't know anything about these people. This is too good of an opportunity to just wing it. So here's what I did based upon the experiences and some of the things that we talked about here. Is I said, more often than not, a CEO or a founder, particularly somebody who just imposes themselves into a meeting or comes into a meeting like that probably has quite a bit of D. Don't know if it's their primary or secondary, but it's there. I should make a note of that. The marketing person. Marketing people tend to have a lot of I. May not be their primary, but there's a lot of it in there because it makes sense given the types of things that marketing people will do in the company and without. The HR person, because she's talking about team and initiative and making sure it's seamless and transitions, like she's talking S speak, that one was a no-brainer. And the CFO, more often than not, CFO is going to have a lot of C because just forecast analytics and things along those lines. So already, or earlier forecasts, I felt I could probably go in to the meeting with those assumptions and be able to talk to with the understanding what's on the screen right now. But I wanted to do better because I wanted to know, I wanted to see how this thing could potentially flow. So remember when I mentioned earlier with the forecast of those little added details you can see if you scroll down the forecast, is it going to get windy? Should I bring it? Right. So I went onto their LinkedIn profiles, again, using the tool that I mentioned before, and I got some extra added insights. Part of it was validating my original guess, and second was giving me the added insights. And here's what I found and how it helped me better prepare and better execute the call. That CEO that I thought was a D, she was. She's a D and her secondary is I, which to me, and these are in my notes in HubSpot, my notes were, she's a strong leader who likes to have fun with her people, right? So how important is that as you're going into a meeting? Like that's like a buddy sends you a text message right before, hey, she's a strong leader, loves to have fun with her people. Awesome, thank you. That's the level of preparation I do for myself. Then I looked at the CFO. The CFO was the primary C, secondary S. I want data. I also don't want to have to mix it up. They're like it's the status quo is good for us, right? And then I started recognizing the secondary for everyone. The human resources person is the SI. So I recognize that the HR person is going to connect with the marketing person on feelings and the people factor in our conversation, right? Our solutions have technical and our solutions have people. So the S's and the I's tend to gravitate and talk about feelings, people. They ask how and who a lot of times in their questions. So I could see the synergy there. Yes, please.
Could I ask and apologize if I missed this, and maybe you were using maybe you're using a tool, but like what were you looking at within those profiles to be able to give you sort of that semblance of understanding, especially sort of the multi-layered understanding of who these folks are? Was it like how they're presenting their experience on their profile? Was it the content they were putting out, what they were posting? Like, yeah, could you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. And I just use that Humantic dashboard tool
Okay,
that I was
cool.
talking about before.
Yeah.
But it does for me all the things. So prior to using it, right, and I'm a client, and I have other clients that are in there because I see the value in it, something I wanted to purchase. Before, I would have done all the things that you've said. Hey, based upon what I'm seeing in the wording, and I would even look at their comments a little bit, kind of get a sense of tone. But I can now do it all in less than 30 seconds, and it's close enough. Like it's close enough for me to go in with a general understanding of how these executives that I've never met are probably going to flow. That DI leader, she's going to refer to her CFO and her VP, or her senior VP. She's going to refer to them on certain things. When it comes to, hey, are the people going to rally behind it? Right? She's going to turn the marketing. Right? These are the things I can see. How are the conversations going to potentially flow with the information that I have available? And then I use that when I'm introducing and setting up the call. I speak to each of them, and this is more advanced with practice and then more practice, I answer all of their questions in their disc style. You want to talk about absolute magic when someone asks you a question in their comfortable, natural style, and you respond back to them, that matching and mirroring in a similar style. It makes a huge difference because everyone feels like you're speaking with them and not just to them collectively. I see a couple hands.
That's really cool. Jessica had a question.
Yes.
Yeah. So, you talked about like DI and CS and SI. Can you be DS or CI? Can you go crosswise?
You can. And what's interesting is the DS, CI, or the polar opposites, if you will, you don't see them as often. However, because sometimes they can be conflicting. So I used to joke around that IC stood for I'm confused, because they wanted to have a bunch of fun, but they also had something screaming to them about organization, and I's don't tend to be organized. So at some point they're like, I want to do all this fun stuff. I need that process, buzzkill. And there was just inner conflict in some cases. What I have seen more and more from a leadership standpoint is a rise in more of that DS. And it's not necessarily generational or age wise. I think it's more, how many tough, hard years have you had in your career leading? I want to be direct, but I want to be fair. So the DI from a leader is, I'm a strong leader, loves to have fun with their people. The DS is that strong and fair and consistent leader, not the one that goes, off the hinges every time something goes awry. The DC, my style, is going to be more of I want to get results, but I want to make sure we have that process that we can rely on to get consistent results. If I can add a little thing, because it's a pain in the ass to have to redo it all over again. So let's do it right the first time. I will delegate all of that to a C style to build it for me. And then I will help put together the stuff so we can, right? So I recognize my strengths. You want to build something amazing, you leave it all to me to build, not going to happen. You want to build it and you just need very specific direction, so you build it right. That's my speed. And I recognize it. So now I think about other leaders. Who is that CEO going to lean on in that conversation I have right now? We're talking 45 people that are going to be, we're going to be working with. Who is that CEO going to lean on when they're looking for justification of the expense, when they're looking at, hey, how can we pull this off so that way it's not a big old dumpster fire when we try to roll out this training, right? They're going to talk to the S about the rollout. They're going to talk to the C about the financial and ROI and whether it fits in some of the other logistics. They're going to talk about, right? They're going to talk to marketing perhaps, or that marketing person. Give me a sense of culture. Is this what the team's craving? How is this going to impact or go to market after we have the training? I know who they're going to chat with based upon these styles and the insights. And again, it's taken me about 7.5 with the questions here to share it with you. But those little insights allowed me to speak directly to each of those personas in a very personal way. And it resonated. And the follow-up email I got from the CEO afterwards, which is why I thought to include this in future sessions, was I was really impressed with what you said, but I was more impressed that you were looking at and speaking directly to each of my people and not just me or not just us collectively. Admittedly, I didn't realize I was doing it as much as I was, because this has just become part of what I've done. It's become part of how I do things. I've internalized it. So adult learning model says you're going to learn something, you're going to know it, and then you're going to own it. My goal here today is to make sure that you've all at least learned the fundamentals of how it can apply, me, others. Okay, cool, I'm curious. You can't not see it. Go to a bar or a restaurant and you can observe this in its natural habitat. It'd be a great way for you to pick up those little cues. Oh, look at them. Definitely an I. Look at that person. Straight, formal, expressionless, not interacting with other people until someone right? You can start to see these nuances. And I just want to be able to encourage you. And again, happy to answer all the questions, go as detailed and granular as you need or want to, is to make sure this is happening all around you. Just want to make sure you're aware of, grab that, grab this. So weather forecast or a buddy of yours saying, hey, I heard you're meeting with, here's a quick little tip for you to think about. That's how I use all of this information in my prospecting or preparing for my meetings, or in this case, a speaking engagement. And then I use that, I put those notes into my CRM, I track it through the process. So every time I need to send a follow-up email, obviously you've got one-click personalization, and you've got some that have AI support to help you with that. I think Lavender and Reggie and Humantic, they all have great, awesome products. I'm sure there's others out there. Use them if you need some help. But I also am a firm believer, having gotten a bunch of crappy emails, those that are short, you're concise, you're specific, and you're human, I will open and respond to every one of those emails. If you're a lead gen person that wants to go ahead and give me 5 paragraphs on why I should be, no, I don't want to answer that one. All right, so I see some smiles, I see some gears going. Where are we at? What do we want to learn? Because again, communication is tough. But we're making it harder than it needs to. So using this to make a cheat sheet of some of the people in your world. And by the way, I do have a cheat sheet I will forward over to Ryan immediately following the session. He can put it up wherever, make it available wherever he needs to, and it'll help you dig who are the people that are important in various aspects of my life. And that's usually the first stop. And I want to flip across here to
Keith, I think Evan has a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, as you were just rifling through those slides really quickly, it looks like it's something you were planning on getting to. But what would you say are some of the shortcomings of this model? Generally, and I mean, generally psychometric tools are directional at best. In my experience, they generally struggle with test retest validity, and the DISC model definitely fits that. Not that I'm saying that this is, bunk or pseudoscience. I'm saying this is really useful. It's a good tool to have in your back pocket, and any kind of data is going to be helpful when you get into that conversation. But what are some of the shortcomings? What are some of the places where you find that this doesn't help?
Actually, I haven't found too many cases where it can at least be a legitimate part of the combo. Where I have found the problems is when you have people that say go all in of DISC is going to be what we use to make our decision, right? I've seen from a hiring standpoint, like I've seen one leader who's a C, one leader who's an S, who have hired a bunch of people and they're all the same style as they are. That could be a terrible thing. That could be an okay thing. They needed to know. So it's the ones that are like, we're going to use it exclusively for our team building, exclusively to determine performance and promotions. When they take it to the extreme, or when people would expect it to be 100% accurate, which is why I brought the weather forecast example. Look, if it says it's going to be 75 and sunny and it ends up being 68 and partly cloudy, you're probably not going to be dressed wrong. Yeah. But you're also not going to get mad at you actually might get mad at the weather person, right? So I think understanding that no tool is perfect, regardless of whether it is, and these things do have an element of subjectivity, which is the reason why I can't take any of them anymore. I could put myself stone cold in any one of those quadrants if I wanted to. So there's no validity for me, but I already own it, and I do and say these things already. So that's where I'm glad you said before, because I've heard the pseudoscience, and we've had that PhD combo with numerous people on boards, which is always amusing because I always seem to win. It's the DC that helps them say, well, the very reason you're actually going against it just reaffirms the fact that your results are correct, right? So but I think the part of it is if you recognize, like the weather forecast, this information is easily accessible. I just need to open my eyes and my ears and pay attention to some things I didn't know it could be useful, and then including it where you can. I've also had times where I have made an educated guess that some leader was X and maybe a little bit of Y, and I was completely off, but I had the semblance to realize quickly, you know what? I kind of thought you were a little bit more of one of these, but now I'm kind of getting and I leaned into it a little bit, little chuckle. We were good to go. I was able to calibrate, but it's basically because I have, this premise here and this foundation behind it. It's a great question.
Appreciate it.
Okay. So was there another question?
Yeah, no, I was just saying, I laughed when you said I'm confused, because I tend to think of myself like between the I and C. But my take on this as well is like, I do think there's a spectrum and people change. Like when I look at myself as I get dive into trying to be more self-aware, I realize that I can be somewhat of a chameleon, based on my upbringing. Like I learned English as a second language, so I always was able to kind of whatever room I'm in, kind of blend in. And this has to do a lot with with what I've been through in life, which now like looking back at it, I'm like, oh, okay, so I see where that comes from. So I think for some, like it does come a little naturally um, to be that way, but having it like put out in front of me, I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Like even I'll set meetings for different AEs, and I know each of them have their own style, and depending on the prospect I'm talking to, I'm like, oh man, like I can't put them with this AE because
Yes.
they are not gonna go, they're not gonna do well together, and it's just gonna hurt. It's gonna hurt the deal. So um, and then I'll pivot and reach out and be like, hey, I think this will be a better fit for this person. So um, yeah, and I wasn't confused as much as I laughed when you said I'm confused, because I definitely see how those two don't really go together. Um, but yeah, and I also do struggle to go into like the D, again, based on a lot of things. So when Ryan pointed that out, I was like, that makes sense.
No, I appreciate sharing. And by the way, kudos. I mean, you said English is a second language. You speak it better than most people I talk to every day. So kudos to you on that. But I think these are the little nuances that we're talking about, is recognizing the situation. I like to do things in a certain way. Not going to work as well. Perfect example, kind of case in point, as we're wrapping up here. We have a 100-pound Labrador. And I've had dogs, and I expect dogs like, hey, look, we've already trained this. You know what you're supposed to do on a walk. Come on. Right. So I naturally, because now I'm in my personal, our result, let's do the walk at the level I know you can do it, because I've seen you do it countless times. And to see, we have a process. So what was happening is I was expecting him to follow the process because, well, I know you know how to do it. Well, he had his own little agenda from time to time, and it would create some frustration. So I thought, just in case. So Ali is an S, right? Loves his routine. He wants to walk and be fed at the same time every day. Well, it doesn't always work when you're creating a business. At the same time, he also loves the affirmation. He loves that pleasing your master type of thing. So the agreement, if you will, that we have, translation, my inner coaching, the agreement we have is I have the expectation that he's going to hit all his marks, as I know he can, during the walk. And each time he does, I need to give him that good boy, good job. And you know what happens? He hits his mark every single time. His tail's wagging. He's having a great time. We both have fun. So for me, the self-awareness was recognizing I want results and I want a process. And a DC is actually one of the smallest percentages of people who are out there in the world. There's fewer than 10% of Ds in the world right now, as far as the scanning. The S's seem to be the biggest. But I recognize that I'm willing and able to be as masochistic as I need to be that professional chameleon, to be as was mentioned earlier, so that I can put my best foot forward and be the best version of me in any conversation. When it talks about being, obviously from a prospecting standpoint, well, I could have 100,000 reasons why I want to make sure I put that level of prep in and come prepared and comfortable. When I'm comfortable with the situation, when I know who's there and what to expect, I can just be myself. When I can't be myself, that's when things might all of a sudden seem a little process driven, a little scripted or templated. So embracing my natural comfort zone, and was asked about the adaptive. When I first took that first assessment and got my head around, okay, I'm going to embrace this thing and not push it away like I have in the past. My need to be adaptive in that I space, to be able to be the trainer that people wanted to have fun working with, to be able to be that presenter that was engaging in all the things. In some cases, the I was I don't have to deal with people again, right? In some cases, the adaptive I was my poker face and my bridge. After a while, it just became so natural. So I typically show up to any conversation as a DI or an ID, just so that way I don't ruffle some feathers until I get a pulse of how the room's going to flow. And then I can kind of embrace what that natural is. I do the same thing for a networking event as I did for here, as I would do on that prospect call. I'm setting myself up for maximum success based upon what could go right and what could go tragically wrong with my disc style, and then getting as much insight as I could on the others. So that way, at least at this point, I'm like, all right, who's going to care about results? Who's going to care about the fun of the people? Who's going to care about the status quo? And who's going to care about the details, the analytics? I'm listening for those 4 things. And I don't care what title, what role, I don't care who says it. The people that are talking about it, now I know which dynamics I need to lean into. And when I speak to the CFO, I speak to them in, so walk me through the processes that you've used before. And at what point, when you're doing your quarterly or monthly checks, what are the things that you're seeing that make you decide to make adjustments, or what might have prompted this, right? I know what they care about. They don't care about the shiny, the bells, the whistle. They don't care about that stuff. So I only talk to the CFO with what he or she cares about in the CFO space. But I also know how, based upon the styles, which leaders are going to lean to which leaders for what parts of my conversation in my. It makes me feel like a genius. It makes me look a little more professional and credible than I probably am on those calls. And all I know is that it's progressing the meetings, and we're having larger conversations with larger prospects because of this method. And so this is why, when I said to Ryan of, this might be a little something that people will benefit from, more than happy to connect and continue the conversation with it. Ryan, please let me know if there's like an ongoing general discussion within these things. Afterwards, I'm happy to have this convo, and however I can be a resource to the community.
Keith, I'm really glad we did this, man. This stuff's fascinating, and it's cool to have people with subject matter expertise like you that have been doing this stuff for over a decade. So this is great, man. Like, share with me that cheat sheet. I'll get it out to everybody. Everybody connect with you. Man, I really appreciate you doing this. We'll do another one.
It was awesome, Keith. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And let's keep the convo going. I'm happy to come back with a part 2. But here now, the important ones showed up. But for those who couldn't have made it, or if there's requests, we'll take it from there.
Right on.
Thanks, Keith. Appreciate it.
We'll see you soon. Thanks, Keith.
Thank you.